Hello everybody, Valerie Ling here. I'm continuing with my challenge of coming online during the weekdays, and today is a segment on parenting, and I hinted in the clinic page, which just reminded me I have to actually share that, that I was going to do something that might help with the whole idea of when you're a parent and you really have the best intentions for your children, but the best that you can do is to say be good, or make sure you do this, or make sure you eat your lunch which is basically giving them some fair warning or sort of a directive to which can sometimes feel like you're nagging. There's that word. Do you like to be nagged at? I certainly don't like to be nagged at. And it is what I want to be talking to you about is actually a concept that I've borrowed from writing picture books. But for those of you who perhaps have come across the concept of narrative therapy, or creating a narrative, a story around our life, it's quite closely connected. But first, let me explain to you the framework that I get from my understanding of my very learned friends who are authors who write picture books, or any book really for children. It's the concept of show, not tell. If you're eventually watching this and you have some experience with this, I'd love to hear what you have to say about this. So the idea is show, not tell. When you are writing for children, the last thing you want to do is to actually write a book that's kind of preachy, that ultimately has a moral story where you finish by saying, and therefore Jack learned that he would never steal from someone else again, the end, right? Because children are very cluey. They pick that stuff up a mile away. If they know that your story, you're just looking like you're interesting, you're looking like you're nice, but you're eventually just going to come to a point of telling them what to do, they are actually going to switch off. So when you're writing for children, it's really important that we respect children, that they are actually the experts of their imagination, that they actually have the ability to be entertained and to have a book come alive in their own mind, such that they conjure up their own images and their own interpretations. And it's a respectful process that actually says that, well, when I'm writing a book, I'm actually going to paint a picture for them, and I'm going to allow them to come and arrive at some conclusions for themselves. So I'm not very good at show, not tell. I struggle with it. I tend to do a lot of telling. But please feel free. If you have an example of show, not tell, I'd love to hear it. It would be something as simple as, instead of saying it is very hot in here, as it is where I am, I'm feeling very stuffy, I might say something along the lines that as I walked into the room, the doors were shut, the windows were closed, and the smell of musty bread lingered in the air from 2 weeks ago. That's a show, not tell, because I'm engaging the senses and I'm allowing the person that I'm talking to actually re-experience it in themselves, for them to join with me by giving them the details and the opportunity to link into the senses and come to their own conclusion. And so the concept of show, not tell, I think, is quite a nice thing, that if authors of picture books have picked this up as being really important, then I think as parents we can carry that technique into the way that we tell our stories to our children. So what is the point of the story? Are we just going to tell them something that eventually we're going to force a conclusion on? Well, let me tell you about the time when I did that, and my teacher said this, and then I did that, and I learned that I would never do this again, and because of that you should always. So that's not a show, not tell to our children. We're actually basically nagging them and forcing some conclusions into them. What I'm going to suggest instead is an approach of storytelling with our kids in family time, not necessarily in family time, that isn't pegged to a learning situation or a learning outcome. It is basically just a respectful space of saying, hey, have I ever told you about the time when I encountered this? Well, this is what happened. And that's it. What we're doing with that is we're actually showing our kids that we really want to be a part of your world. And I've got a story to tell you about a time when I was your age, and that's all. I just want to connect with you at that level to say that, yeah, I remember when that happened to me too. I'll come to a concrete example in a minute. So number one, you just want to connect in the non-heated moments, the non-pointed moments. You know, not to tell a story about the fear of dark and how you conquered the fear of dark and how it was all hunky-dory after that and life was perfect and, you know, you became this marvelous adult. No. We want to be telling them the stories in their everyday moments, and allowing them to have the curiosity to ask questions as and when they have the questions, or allowing them to make the observations as and when they have the observations. And when we're doing that in a really respectful way, that encourages them to actually tell their stories, right? Knowing that if you've respected the space where you're telling them a story and you're not casting judgment or nagging them about it, then they might be able to tell stories back to you where you remain curious and open, asking them about details, not conclusions. Okay, so here's my best attempt at trying to make this practical. There's a particular brand of brownies that my mother used to make with me when I was very little. I think it was, I was 5 or 6 years old. And this particular brand of brownies still exists till today. They're slightly more expensive, so for a period of time I actually didn't buy them. But of late I have found myself gravitating to them and picking them up again. And the story around those brownies is that, I remember a time when I used to make these brownies and the way that they smelt. And I used to love to lick the bowl, and I was given, the job at the end to actually lick the bowl. And it was just a time when I could smell the brownies and I'd be so excited, just waiting for them to finish and being able to actually have a bite and sitting on the kitchen counter and having that with mum. It brings back a lovely memory for me. That's a story. I could have a whole bunch of conclusions about that. Number one, if I was to do the telling, I would be saying, I guess something along the lines of, that is why you and I need to bake some brownies now. Or that is why when you make a mess with this, it makes me feel like you're not, respecting this memory of mine. Or you need to bake brownies with me. This will solve the problem. Because when I was little, I did that with my mum, and right now. You're telling a story of a moment when you were a child yourself, recalling what it was like to be a child, and just telling a story, leaving the space. If the questions come, the questions come. If the questions don't come, the questions don't come. That's fine. And as you're joining with your child in that activity and you're telling your story, and you're listening into their story, and they might say, yeah, I like to lick the bowl too. Oh, do you? What do you like about that? And they might say, oh, well, because, it's my job every time. Do you actually like having that job particularly? Yes. So maybe every time we make the brownies, you might be the one that licks the bowl. Yes. Okay. So it's allowing them to hear your story, to sit with it, to join with you at a point of time when you might have been the same age, and then allowing them to continue with their story or their interpretation. Hello, Daniel. Allowing them to continue with their interpretation, right? So stories are a very powerful way that we can return to a point of time when we ourselves were little or young or confused, if you're going through the teenage years, or when you turn up at a party and you felt like nobody was going to talk to you, or even with myself, with my high school reunion story of telling about what it felt like to actually walk into the door, feel a bit anxious, see my friend, and just go from there. We help our children to actually see that, of course, we can empathize with what they're feeling. Maybe not 100%, but there was a point in time when we were just like them and we felt the same things that they felt, and that normalizes it for them. The other thing storytelling does is it helps to continue the story, to feel like they are part of your story as well, as you tell your story and then they join in with their story, and you're connected in that point of time and creating a new meaning together about what those events might mean for you. So in my home, brownies are a consistent feature. in our home. It is a continuation of a story. It's something that I've done with my mother, and it's something that I enjoy doing with not just my own children, but with children who come to my house. It's a joining of a moment of appreciating the smells, appreciating the warmth of the kitchen, appreciating sitting on the kitchen bench, appreciating licking the spoon after you finish mixing, and the appreciation of actually joining in an activity together. So my parenting segment really is just to encourage storytelling without judgment. Show, don't tell. I talk about the events, talk about your observations, maybe the things that you thought, the things that you smelt, you know, the narrative around the story, but you don't necessarily have to then pronounce a judgment or a moral at the end of it. We can sit in that space, wait for our kids to ask for it. It may not come today. It could come a week later, it could come 6 months later when they're going through something themselves and they say, oh, I was kind of remembering that story that you told me. How did it finish? Or what did you do? Or, you know, what did you end up doing? And then you tell them, then you proceed. And then you engage with them and say, what do you think? What happened with you when you encountered that? What did you do? What did you think? So I'm just going to leave you with that, storytelling, and how it can be a powerful way to actually join with your children if we hold back the judgment and we hold back the need to actually tell. It's a show, don't tell. Okay, take care.